Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Garden Roundtable. Well, today we have back with us Professor Srinath Reddy. He is the president of the Public Health Foundation of India and also a renowned cardiologist and epidemiologist, and also a columnist who I've been following pretty avidly because a lot of his predictions on COVID, what his warnings, his analysis is actually then later on followed by the WHO and is also, is coming true. Whether it's been followed in India or not is something I'm going to be asking him. But welcome back, Professor. When this COVID is not leaving us clearly, we're going to be living in a COVID continuous world. My first question to you is about the third wave. Where are we on it?
Well, the short answer is that we cannot rule it out, but it's unlikely to be a very severe wave, and certainly not all across the country, as we have seen in the second wave. Let me explain. For a third wave to happen, firstly, we require a large number of people who are susceptible. Then we also require many of them to become exposed to the virus, not necessarily protecting themselves very well with masks and not mingling in crowds. We also need to define what we mean by the third wave, whether it's only the number of people who are infected and counted as cases, or number of people who are actually seriously ill and are likely to go to hospitals, because we will see a difference in that, because even if many people are infected, we are unlikely to see very severe infections in a large number of them. Unlike in the second wave, where there was such a rush to hospitals because of very serious illness. Then comes the big question of how many of them are getting tested. We leave out the asymptomatic people. Even the mildly symptomatic people may not want to get tested. May decide that they'll have home care on their own. And lastly, how many of those tests are accurate in terms of the type of test done? I mean, we know that there is a difference between the sensitivity of the RT-PCR and the rapid antigen test, and even the RT-PCR may have to be repeated during the course of an illness 2 or 3 times to get the right result. So if you're really doing the case counts, then a third wave may happen in terms of numbers, but that too will be very different across different parts of the country, because the number of susceptible people and the number of people exposing themselves would vary. However, cumulatively across the country, it's unlikely that we will see a very severe third wave in terms of severe cases requiring hospitalization or even ending up in deaths, unlike in the second wave, unless the joker in the pack is a new variant that comes in, which is not only more infectious, but is capable of evading the immunity conferred either by the natural infection or by the vaccines. Then we have no protection against the new variant. So that is what we need to watch out for. But putting everything together, it appears that on the balance of probabilities, a large third wave is unlikely. We do not know when the spikes will happen, but a surge is unlikely to happen in the next few months.
I'll take the last bit of your answer. You said, given how effective are our vaccinations, not just against the new variant, but even the current variant. Do we now need time for a third dose? I know you've been arguing that the third dose should be first given to the elderly, but that is keeping in mind the scarcity and the, you need to have a maximum coverage. By and large, supposing in an ideal world there were enough vaccinations, would you be recommending a third dose by now?
If you had absolute abundance of vaccines and the ease of giving vaccines with a large number of vaccinating teams, we would still require evidence that a third dose is safe, not only effective. So there are some questions about that too, because all the clinical trials have been done with 2 doses, or in case of Johnson & Johnson with 1 dose. We have seen adverse effects coming in. For example, with the virus vector vaccines, with clotting, particularly among younger persons, especially among young women. We have seen myocarditis and pericarditis happening with younger people with the mRNA vaccines. So the question is, are we sure that the third dose is required in everybody and the balance of benefit versus risk is going to be still very high? Possible. from whatever we have seen from the data from Israel or elsewhere, where the third dose has been administered in large numbers, we have not seen much of a hue and cry about the adverse effects. Though the mRNA vaccines were reported to have this pericarditis and myocarditis from Israel itself, initially, even with the 2 doses. So I would say that given the reality that we do not have an abundance of vaccines, we should prioritize the people who are most likely to be at high risk. And there, the benefit versus risk ratio is very much in favor of the third dose, the immunocompromised and the elderly. Among the others, we'll have to wait for the data to accumulate about both the efficacy as well as safety. And when that happens, and we have enough vaccines, perhaps we will booster dose for others as well.
In terms of, I mean, how do you recommend us who've taken the second dose doing regular antibody checks or are those antibody, and also which antibody test to do, because they're very confusing for a layperson?
Well, basically the problem is that there are a number of antigens in the virus and they produce different type of antibodies. And even more interesting is the fact that the immune response is only partly antibody. The antibodies are those that are produced as the line of defense against the virus that is circulating in the bloodstream. They do not attack the virus once it has entered the cells of the human body. There you require the T lymphocytes or the cellular immunity to come in. And that's not an easy thing to measure. So the laboratory studies which have done it, more sophisticated studies, suggest that that immunity may actually last longer. And secondly, the memory lymphocytes also may be there, may be lying dormant, but they can get activated when challenged again by the virus. So this is all still evolving knowledge. So we cannot really say that everybody is going to have a fade out of immunity in 5 months, which is what the Pfizer people are saying. On the other hand, it's possible that some people, even under the age of 60, may have that. So one would like to really see who are the people at risk, assuming that immunity has faded. If the virus attacks, are they likely to be at a risk of serious disease? If so, develop comorbidities or whatever, do protect them, even people under 60. But certainly prioritize the people who are immunocompromised, who are above 60 years of age, and then below the 60 years of age, whoever have immunocompromised state or serious comorbidities, they need to be prioritized. Because there, even in the current state of incomplete knowledge, we know that the benefit versus risk is likely to be far more in favor of benefit.
And also, Hester, you said that hopefully the third wave won't be as dangerous. But, I remember last year in October, at this point, we were again a little, reassured that, the first wave is over and hopefully no more waves. And we had that drastic second wave. So how do we know that, it's not mutating? Are there any signs? Because India, I think, follows UK in terms of the waves. So they had a third wave and a pretty serious one. So what are we doing? Are we finally waking up? Are we vaccinating right? Or you think, is there reason to worry, basically?
UK's last wave is more in terms of case numbers, not in terms of serious infections. And even there, most of the people who got into hospital were people who were either not vaccinated or incompletely vaccinated. So we now have, of course, even here, the complete vaccination in terms of 2 doses is only about 20%. But many people have also been exposed in the last 6 months to the infection, natural infection with the virus. And many others have had at least the first dose. So taking cumulatively and taking the younger population age structure, I believe we are unlikely to see the kind of devastation that we saw in the second wave. But that doesn't mean we should be careless, because suppose a new variant sneaks in, which, variants are arising in different parts of the world. And we cannot always say that we will be able to, with absolute 100% surety, block it at the border. So if a variant does sneak in, we should not give it an opportunity to spread fast before it's detected. So I think, and a variant can emerge even within our population from the unvaccinated pockets that still exist in our country. So we ought to still continue with our precautions like masking, avoiding large crowds, and preferably operating as much as possible in ventilated areas, at least for some months more. What we can really take comfort from the fact is the supposition that if a new variant, which is not only more infectious but also more likely to be evading the vaccine, if that doesn't appear on the scene, whatever forces we have garnered so far, even with our partial vaccination drive, as well as with a fairly high exposure to the virus because of the second wave, we still have a large number of people who will be able to ward off the serious infection. May not be mild infection, but certainly the serious infection.
Can you explain Kerala to us? They had if I'm not wrong, a bad very first wave and a bad second wave. Is it because they are more, on their testing, they are pretty active on the testing, or is it some other reason?
We must firstly see what is the percentage of susceptible population, what is the age structure, and what is the urban-rural differentiation in the population. In terms of age structure, Kerala certainly has much older population. In terms of urban-rural differentiation, there is very little such differentiation in Kerala, unlike in many other parts of India. The urban areas are not highly urbanized and the rural areas are certainly not very rural. And therefore, there is a very high level of mobility internally in the state. Then from within the country, there are a large number of people or Keralites who keep coming and going into the state. And similarly, even international ingress from people who are staying outside, working outside, the large numbers come in. So there is a great opportunity for the virus to spread. But it's also true that the number of susceptible people in the last few months who were exposed to the virus was fairly high. As we have seen from the ICMR antibody surveys, only 44% of persons tested in Kerala showed presence of positive antibodies, which as opposed to the national average of 67%, which means there was still a fairly large susceptible population which the virus could attack. And this could have been because the precautions taken in Kerala spread out the risk over a larger time interval rather than having the huge surge that we saw in many other parts of the country during the second wave, where we sort of let the virus wash its way through the population. So multiple reasons have actually combined. But of course, the Onam experience also was there, that they allowed themselves to be exposed a great deal to the virus. It's not just the fact that you have a large number of susceptible people still left. It's also how many people who are susceptible are exposing themselves to the virus and giving it an opportunity to attack. And that's where I think they had faltered.
That's a very worrying note because we are going in for the Diwali season here and for the UP elections also around the corner. So that's something I think we should take note over here also. But I'm going to take a quick break and come back and keep the conversation going. Hello and welcome back to NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. We're in conversation with Professor Srinath Reddy about COVID, the third wave, the booster shot, and of course now about the long COVID. That's still something that's plaguing us, and unfortunately, Professor, we have no data to tell us how long the long COVID is really going to last. That's the biggest fear, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we have seen different estimates of people saying that it will be in some populations they have reported 10%, some populations they have reported 22%, and in some even up to 30% if you take very vague symptoms also into account. And the worrisome part is that even in children, very rare though it is, it's being reported there too, but with good recovery. So there is concern about long COVID. The dynamics of long COVID are still being understood in terms of what are the pathological processes that actually prolong this COVID manifestations over a period of time. No specific treatment has yet been identified. So trials are going on. But I think given the fact that there is the risk of long COVID, while there is expectation that very few people will suffer beyond a few months with all the manifestations of long COVID, nevertheless, the best precaution is to prevent being infected in the first place.
That's true. But also a lot of vaccinations. Why are the vaccinations giving more severe symptoms or after effects to the younger population than to the older? Is there a aid? Is this because we've seen in this, with the 18 to 40, they're having, they get more fever, chances of getting fever for the first 2 days, aches and pains, which in the older lot, none of, at least I never got it, but I know a younger person than me, all of them are complaining. So is it there is an age problem here?
Well, you may not be happy with the explanation because the manifestations which you mentioned are basically seen because of a vigorous immune response that the body mounts to the vaccine. And younger people mount a much more vigorous response. So that's why you get all these mother aches and fever and everything else. I mean, that is the body's immune system components which are actually demonstrating that. It's not the virus itself. It's not the other elements of the vaccine. So younger people will experience it much more because they can put up a much better fight. Whereas older people sort of accept the vaccine without that much of a resistance from the body, and the immune response is not as strong. That's why we say that if the boosters have to be given, it's to the people at the higher end of the age spectrum.
That makes sense. In fact, that's a bit reassuring. It's a good message to tell the younger lot who are hesitant of taking it. They're saying, "कि vaccine से हमको COVID हो जाएगा." That's the general reaction that one is getting. But going beyond that, the whole controversy over Covaxin, when will it get WHO approval? I know a lot of people want to travel, and I think the only person who's getting to travel with Covaxin is our Prime Minister. The rest of us have to wait.
We are being told that October 5th is the magic date when they'll take it up. That's what we are reading it in the media. Till it is done, we'll still have to wait and guess. But if the company has submitted all the data that's been demanded of it, I think there should be expectation of a clearance early October. But we'll have to still wait and see.
And in terms of new vaccinations, what is on the anvil for India? The nasal vaccine is something that we've been hearing about. Where are we on that? And what is the one that you are most hopeful about? Sorry.
Well, the trials are still going on. And you have, of course, the DNA vaccine that's just been cleared. You're having vaccines that have been developed outside, which are being manufactured in India, like the protein subunit vaccine that Biological E is going to produce. I mean, they're producing Johnson and Johnson vaccine, but they're also producing a protein subunit vaccine separately, and that can actually give a good boost to the immune response against the spike protein. But I really would like to have my bets on vaccines which cover more antigens than just the spike protein, because of the simple reason that the virus is continuing to adapt and mutate and develop mechanisms to evade the spike protein. So I'd rather see more complete antigenic ensemble, either in the form of an inactivated virus or in the form of a multi-antigen vaccine, which can actually protect much better, even if the virus develops many mutations of the spike protein, which make it capable of vaccine evasion. The other thing is we need to study a little more, and those are going on, about the T-cell immunity. If we have clear-cut idea of how each vaccine influences T-cell immunity for a longer period, then that is the vaccine that will give us the best protection.
So where are we on that one? The T-cell vaccination?
Well, it's still going on. I mean, basically all vaccines will stimulate the T-cells. But which are the vaccines that stimulate the T-cells much more and for a much longer period with much better recall also of the memory cells? So that varies partly upon the people. I mean, older people will still have less recall than the younger people. But nevertheless, among the vaccines, which is the one which provides the best T cell response, is something that we need to see.
Finally, Professor, also you on public health, are you happy with the pace with the vaccinations are being now administered? And do you have any suggestions that which which we can implement in improving the pace or improving the credibility of the vaccinations? Because a lot of people still have doubts. So should there be actually some messengers being sent, people with the who actually are trying to make people vaccine literate?
Well, as far as the pace is concerned, it seems to have suddenly ramped up. I mean, I think like Indian T20 cricketers, we suddenly get into the slog overs and then start really swinging the bat around, which is a good thing. The asking rate keeps coming down. I think we're making good progress now. But we need to ensure that smaller towns and the villages are much better covered and vaccine resistance is broken down. Some people have put off vaccination partly because they were confused by this booster dose controversy. Some were confused about whether we should be waiting for newer, more effective vaccines to come and so on. But others who are concerned about the safety of the vaccines, I think we need to allay their anxiety and tell them that whatever vaccines that are available are essentially safe and mostly effective, especially among the younger people and the middle-aged people, and they do not require booster doses based on current scientific evidence, and they should go ahead and take the vaccines in any case. But that is where I think citizen engagement becomes very, very important. We need to reach out to community groups. Unless the local trusted influencers are engaged, mere mass media campaigning will not do. Because all the doubts are actually aired in small groups, in families, in the neighborhoods, in community groups. And that is where we must actually find the people who can convince others with the right information. So we need to keep up
RWA leaders.
RWI leaders, village panchayats, women's self-help groups, even non-polarizing religious leaders, social workers of various kinds, youth groups, all of these are going to be very, very important for us to engage.
When do you see, can you hazard a guess as to when schools, colleges, when can we, get back our lives as they were?
Well, as far as schools and colleges are concerned, I think we ought to now get back to opening them up with precautions. I think people are waiting for the festive season to see whether there is going to be a surge, and they don't want to take chances. If it doesn't happen, then I think we should be ready to get back, because we can't delay education too long. I mean, that will be costing us a great deal in the long run. And with suitable precautions, I think we should be able to do it, because the evidence suggests that by and large, most of the children are not likely to suffer serious illness if infected. If we can vaccinate most of the adults who are going to come into contact with them, the teachers, the school personnel, the drivers, and of course, if the adults at home are vaccinated, then the likelihood of the children getting infected is going to be low, particularly if masks are going to be universal. If we conduct the classes in well-ventilated spaces, we can use less crowded classrooms with shifts to begin with. Then the likelihood of transmission is also greatly reduced. But we cannot close off colleges and schools indefinitely. That will be very counterproductive. But I think right now the mood is to wait for the festive season to be over and see whether there is going to be a surge, and if not, then go ahead and open. Though some people have already started in some states opening up to the higher classes. In fact, it's the lower classes that actually are likely to be more safe. But the teachers do need to get vaccinated though.
I think the cases that are prevalent today, I think I was reading some 30,000 new cases every day. That's the rate right now. Are these cases very serious? Because I asked a couple of doctors in Delhi, they said currently we don't have any COVID patients in the capital, at least, who have been admitted to the hospital. So these 30,000 or whatever the case numbers are not very serious cases by and large. Am I right in assuming that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, basically the people who were to get badly infected, the most vulnerable, not just in terms of infection, but in terms of severity, were already infected during the second wave. And the cases that we are seeing now are people who are likely to be experiencing mild infections rather than very severe infections. And that is one of the good indicators to have that the hospitals are not overcrowded.
No single patient, as what I was told from at least 2, 3 doctors that I spoke to. But on that note, thank you, Professor,
So
for
let's
joining
hope
us
that,
and helping us understand.
well, let's hope that the festive season passes off and then we'll again meet with a sigh of relief rather than a worried brow of concern.
Let's see the look we have post Diwali. But I'm going to call you before again to at least reiterate and again educate everyone to be careful, to be safe, and issue warnings. But until then, thank you so much for talking to us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.